If you've played Battlefront 2 since launch, you know that the Emperor has been a thorn in the developers and many players' side since very soon after launch. At one point, he could even shoot his base lightning attack through walls, causing immense frustration and sweaty plays from, let's just say, the least generous part of the player base. He even got so bad at one point he was just kill switched out of the game for around a month, if my memory serves me correctly. Clearly the developers have been tackling how best to control Palpatine's and have failed to please everyone, with regular complaints still common. However, I was thinking about this today, and I think that some reworks to Palpy could put him in a more enjoyable spot to play and to come up against. Since they recently reworked Leia and Chewie to a lesser extent, they could absolutely give everyone's favorite grandpa some new moves, which would put him into what I think is a more enjoyable position. Palpatine is currently the only Force user without a block. I mean, there's even a non-Force user that has one. If we look back to the previous game, he had one with a slick animation as well. So I think it should return for a number of reasons. This will obviously change how he is controlled and would have knock-on effects that will need to be addressed. So that is how we will proceed. But first, let's break down how his block would work. Palpy would be able to block blaster bolts with the same animation as Battlefront 2015 and with the ability to store them and their energy the same way Yoda currently does. This would drain his stamina, but I'll get into how much in just a second. What I suggest is letting that energy be released via his electrocute ability. Just like how Yoda can perform a push with or without absorbing some bolts, so would Palpy be able to stun enemies whenever the ability is off cooldown. However, if he has absorbed bolts, his electrocute will stun and deal proportional damage to every enemy affected. That's proportional to how many bolts were absorbed, not proportionally to how many enemies there are. The area of effect wouldn't grow like Yoda's, and he would have a maximum damage he can hit, just like the meter on Yoda's ability. Now that he can block bolts, the next question would be whether he could block sabers. Yes, he could block, but not for long. See, what I was thinking was we could pull a reverse Grievous and have him terrible at blocking lightsabers, but excellent at absorbing bolts. Thematically, Grievous doesn't have any force powers, so he can't sense where the blaster bolts are coming and would be overwhelmed by just more than a few. But he has been trained in Jedi lightsaber arts by Count Dooku, and therefore can take a lot more before he runs out of stamina. In reverse, Palpatine is strong with the Force and can predict every single blaster bolt that comes his way, and thus I would give him loads of stamina, like Obi-Wan levels of defensive stamina in this regard. However, he wouldn't be able to block lightsabers for long. It would be up to the animators how they would want Palps to block against sabers. Maybe a shield wall of lightning, or maybe just some small strikes like you can see at the end of his melee attacks, and have that go against the sabers. Key point being that his stamina would drain fast, because well, we all know how long periods of his lightning against sabers have gone for him in the past.
Don't listen to him, Anakin! Don't let him kill me!
With the block introduction will come the loss of the single-handed, double-handed lightning mechanic. If you don't know, when attacking with one hand, which is assigned to one trigger, Palpatine's lightning does less damage but targets multiple enemies in close proximity. Changing that to two hands with both triggers focuses on one target, does more damage and drains stamina faster. Obviously, with the block implemented and assigned to one trigger, this mechanic will no longer be possible. I suggest replacing his current one trigger attack with the two-handed attack on one trigger, but with the ability to affect two enemies at the same time. However, the damage will be less if it hits two. The radius for the two players to be affected will be relatively small, and the damage drop-off won't be as severe, obviously, as it is now. Hardly when anyone uses the one hand for crowd control. What they rely on for that is the Dark Aura, and with these changes, it'll be needed for crowd control more than ever. The Aura is great right now, especially with the slow removed, but I think we can make it better by having it give a damage reduction as well to your teammates who come into contact with it. I'm still torn whether it should be a small damage reduction you carry with you for a period of time once you've come into contact with it, or a bigger damage reduction but it requires you to remain inside of it and thus close to Palpatine to promote, crowd control via teammates, big teammates in numbers. Either way, this will incentivize staying close to Palpatine and in close contact with him, and thus offering some teammate protection.
Reinforcement will not come in time. My dear friend Yoda.
With a block introduced and Dark Aura buffed, I believe people won't resort to being super slippery all the time. You know what I mean. They'll have more defensive capabilities as well as more incentives just to stick near their teammates and have teammates stick to them and won't just have to rely on themselves and thus Palpy's weaselly moves. The one scenario they might default to the slippery moves, however, is if they are suddenly outnumbered, and it is for this scenario that I believe a buff to the chain lightning would be greatly in order. The biggest change I would implement is replacing the base amount of people that can get hit with chain lightning to the max that it can be hit now with a surge of lightning star card equipped. I would also give it a damage buff, but each additional enemy it hits after the first would receive 5% less damage than the target it hit before. This would allow the lightning to do some real damage and really take care of enemies closest to the Emperor, but still be able to weaken those coming in for support. It would also justify using the chain lightning on just one enemy with the huge amount of increased damage I would implement, as so many players use it on a limited amount of enemies anyway. The complaints usually levied against Palpy are that he's too powerful and requires less skill to play. Well, with these changes, turning Palpatine into a more defensive and support character, more skill and coordination will be required. He'll have some additional buffs to compensate for the change in playstyle, but not so much that skill won't be required anymore. Also, these changes really incentivize the dropping of the slippery moves as more defensive options are given to the Emperor. The layer rework proved hugely popular, and I hope that Guillermo would consider changing Palpatine around even just a little bit. He certainly has a better understanding than I do, and I can only imagine what amazing changes he would have in store.